Welcome to the Public Voice Salon. We are an open dialogue on education, the arts, and social change. My name is John Bredin. I'm an educator. And we have with us today someone who I've wanted to have on the show for a very long time. He is a legendary person in the public access community. He's one of the great voices in the media today, a true intellectual, Mr. Harold Channer, who has had a show on the air for over 40 years. He's interviewed some of the greatest minds of our time in the field of culture, in the arts, in politics, and business. And we're just so really grateful to have Harold on our show and to, so to speak, interview the interviewer.
Yes, right.
It's about time that somebody sit down with Harold and really find out a little bit about Harold, about, you know, where you come from in terms of your background and how you developed into the person you are today, someone who's so curious about intellectual thought and about processes and systems thinking, and really such a great rarity in the desert landscape of television today that we see with mainstream media and the superficiality. You go into depth and complex issues. So we want to start. We're in Harold's lovely home in Midtown Manhattan here in the West 30s, and you can see the Empire State Building is behind us. We're sitting out on the lovely deck, and we thought we couldn't figure out whether to film it inside your lovely home or outside. But we're going to do the first half outside here, and then we're going to go inside and finish it up. But we're going to just begin, Harold, at the beginning in terms of your background and development and your education and how you developed into the thinker you are today.
Well, I don't remember much before I was born, but I was born in March 14. Incidentally, that's Pi Day. Have you realized they've made that Pi Day? That's Albert Einstein's birthday.
And the day before the Ides of March.
Oh, that's true. Yeah. That is true. Beware of which. But there was a serious movement going for a while. I'm not sure.
So you were saying about your birthday?
Yeah, that's March 14th, and there was a serious movement for quite a while around in various quarters to make Albert Einstein's birthday a holiday. And boy, I used to go to Washington quite a bit in those days, and I used to lobby hard to get that done because that's my birthday. And I would love to have had all the kiddies out of school so we could hopscotch down and have an ice cream cone rather than going to school. Now, you're not supposed to say that. Yeah. But anyway, yeah, March 14th, way back in 1935.
Well, just to say quickly that we have something in common because I was born on Lincoln's birthday,
wow,
February 12th, and I always felt that I had the day off because of my birthday, on Lincoln's birthday. So you had Einstein, I had Lincoln, and okay.
Well, Einstein, it wasn't me. I mean, I would love to have my birthday on holiday, national holiday. That would have been great. But it wasn't me they were looking at. It was the great Albert Einstein, who was a giant. It would be good to have somebody celebrated who was an intellectual rather than all the people who successfully fought wars.
There is no intellectual currently whose birthday that we celebrate.
I think there should be some place for the intellectual exercise in human society. But anyway, yeah, that's where I was born, and I was middle class. My dad was a lawyer. My mother was the best mother in the history of the universe.
And where were you born?
In Detroit, Michigan. And it was a beautiful town then. We'd come out of the Depression, which had roiled everything, but it was a wonderful setting, really. I think it couldn't have had a better setting. Two older sisters. The family was very warm and welcoming, intellectually encouraging, and so forth. We had the Encyclopedia Britannica and the Harvard Classics that you could read and everything. And it was a very privileged upbringing, not necessarily like from the manor born or anything like that, but that was where I was born and raised.
Getting a little Norman Rockwell-esque feeling of Americana, or no?
Well, I think there was more little, some avant-garde stuff around the edges. Our house became a place for gathering of everybody, particularly as we got older and went to university and got to be adults and everything. It was a socializing going on and everything like that.
And what did your parents do?
Well, my dad was a lawyer, and he was in the class of 1926. And I'm not sure, but I think, and there were only 40 people in his class at the University of Michigan. And I'm not sure, but one of the two, I'm not sure if you're familiar, but you might well be, with the Leopold and Loeb. The huge, and I was raised on Clarence Darrow. Darrow for the defense. He was a great hero, even growing up. But both of them, they were from Chicago. And they were in his class, or one of them was, I'm not sure, the class of 26. And there were only 40 people in the class. I mean, it was really small. But, and I thought for a long time that they were so, I don't know if it was narcissistic or whatever, but Clarence Darrow defended them. Yeah. But they had murdered Bobby Frank. And I had thought for a long time that they thought that they were so elevated, like an Ubermenschen kind of.
They were reading Nietzsche.
Yeah, they could have, but they're people.
Well, they took Nietzsche to an extreme in the way that the Nazis incorporated Nietzsche. Nietzsche is an important philosopher, but he can't. People can take him the wrong way.
Yeah. Well, anyway, but I found out. I thought they were so uber that they had a right to kill the lesser human beings who were lesser stock, which was not the case. I found out after researching it, it's just they thought they could get away with it, which is a whole different kind of thing.
So I just want to say quickly, my own Leopold and Loeb story, Harold, is that my dad was in a play called Compulsion. Yeah. And the play was based on the Leopold and Loeb story. Okay. And he was in that play. My dad was an actor when he was a young man. And what happened was he was in a play called Compulsion in 1959 that was at the North Jersey Playhouse. Yeah. And in the play with my father was a Mr. Warren Beatty. Wow. And he was in that play. And that's the play where he was discovered by a guy named Joshua Logan, who was a director. And he discovered Beatty and introduced Beatty to his friend William Inge, who brought him into Splendor in the Grass, and that's what started Warren Beatty's career. It all goes back to Compulsion, and my dad was in that play, and now we have a Leopold and Loeb connection here.
Yeah, okay. Yeah. Anyway, and then I'll gallop on, but
who I want to know, Harold, in terms of your intellectual growth, was it someone in your family? Was it part of your education? Did you have a particular teacher? Who sparked you? Was it somebody that you saw in the media, a book that you read? Let's talk about how you developed early on up into your 20s as a thinker.
Oh well, I don't know. The whole environment was intellectually curious and a lot of humor and everything. And I had an older sister. I had two older sisters. They were wonderful. They were perfect. It was like perfect. They looked out for me and everything. And it became a place where there was always people congregating, and it was all people who were going on in the university, and when we got to that. But as for the family, my father's mother, Lulu Hudson is my middle name, and she was the first woman, and I got to run it down, but she was the first woman. It may have been just in the state of Michigan, but it could have been in the country, and this is, I'm not sure, but she was the first woman to ever graduate from the University of Michigan Medical College. Oh. And women were not supposed to be medical people. They were supposed to be taking care of children at home. And she broke the glass ceiling. Oh, goodness. In 1888.
That was your grandmother.
Yeah, my grandmother on my father's side. Yeah, Lulu Hudson Sprunk. No, not Sprunk, Lulu Hudson. And that was the Depression time. I was born in 1935, so I'm just almost 80 now. But, there were a lot of people on the road, Woody Guthrie and that. And there was a woman who would come to live in our house who took care of the kids, but it wasn't like a maid, but she would cook and the kids, and it was all, she was like one of the family. And I hadn't remembered Lucy well. I was only 5 when she passed. I can kind of vaguely remember they had a kind of biggish house downtown on 16th Street. And Henry Ford, when he was about 8 or 9 years old, used to tinker in their garage. Oh. So it was Detroit. And Detroit was a booming place. 1/6 of the economy was automobiles, and so it was trees everywhere. It was really a beautiful place. It's had a terrible time lately, but I didn't remember Lulu very well, the woman who broke the glass ceiling. would be a heroine of the feminist, the ladies, the women. And she said, I said, I didn't remember. And she said, yeah, Lulu, that's right, she was. She broke the glass ceiling. And I'm here to tell you, son, she was a real bitch. Which I think probably she would have had to be. Yeah. So there may be some, get up and go in terms of trying to change the society, and that it was encouraged. It was all intellectually just and fun and great dog, and it was it was Norman Rockwell, I guess, in a way. Or that was a very happy time after the war. The war had been won. There was growth
between the First and Second World War, or no, after the First World War.
No, after the Depression.
Right.
And then that's when television came. We had a dentist next door, and they got a new television set, and Paley had started, and Sarnoff and so forth. They had a little bit of television in New York, but there wasn't an industry like, and it awaited the discovery of videotape. The early programs, Show, and Carl Reiner and all that, they were archived on a film project. We had electricity, and then we had the radio, and then we had film, okay? And then they had to invent videotape. Sarnoff, Robert, I forget his name now, it'll come to me. The guy who was Peter Goldmark Sr., the father of Peter Goldmark, who was head of the Port Authority more recently. But he invented videotape. And we did a program with him. He invented video, and that set the pace for the whole industry that was growing, television. But they bought a television set in 1946. We put it in the corner, and
in your home, in your house, or no?
Right next door. And and their son, one of their sons, they had 3 kids, and one of the sons was my best friend. We grew up together. You know, we had the tin can with the waxed string going across to one to. But they put the television set in the corner, and there was nothing on at all. There was a test pattern. And we looked at the test pattern until Kukla, Fran, and Ollie finally came.
Kukla, Fran, and Ollie.
Well, the early stuff, you know.
Yes.
And so then we were off to the races, and then it all got sent to Japan for the hardware, and the industry was off and running. So that was a transition as I came onto the scene, I guess, and everything.
See, my father, when he was a kid, he used to watch Uncle Milty, he said. Tuesday nights, he said, and before that, his family had a television set. The neighbor kid had a TV, and everybody would go to their house and watch. So what were some of the early shows, Harold, that stood out, that influenced you, that you could say maybe had an influence even on the TV pioneering work that you would later become and do?
I wished I could point to the great books or something, but I can't report to anything that really had a strong influence.
It was a process.
It was just a process of doing that, and then busy keeping out of trouble and making trouble, and youth, all that kind of stuff. But it was a privileged upbringing, and it was just a beautiful, big trees and everything. It was lovely, yeah. But anyway, so that's how I got. That's Detroit, and then I went to universities, taught at a few universities and things like that, and then got interested. And I did the degree in geography.
Political geography and economic geography. Now that is very interesting. It's not just geography, but political and economic geography. Is that?
Well, I would make that point. John Sinclair was a friend of mine. Later, that's when I got older. I had to get drafted into the United States Army. It was a Korea time, or the end of the Korea, and we had to go in the Army. I really didn't like the Army because I'm really very, what would you call, anti-authoritarian, and the Army is really authoritarian. It sets the pattern for the whole society with senior vice presidents, everybody jumps and all that. And I didn't fit in. I used to try and explain as an enlisted man to the sergeants we could do things democratically, and they didn't want to listen. But I'd gotten through without getting court-martialed or anything, which was good.
You're an iconoclastic type of guy.
I guess so.
A rebel?
Yeah, but all young men are, aren't they? I think they're all they push the envelope. Men are sort of silly things. Young men are so silly, aren't they? And so was I. But anyway, I did that, and then went to university and got a degree. But I would like to take exception in a certain sense, and I'm not sure how conscious it was. But I liked geography not so much because you could specialize. Did a lot of reading in geopolitics and things and all that. But I liked it because it was so inclusive. You can, because I think I've always been more interested and against the grain, which is galloping now, toward highly specialized curriculum for the educational process. And geography, you can be interested in climate and in weather and in soils and political or intellectual. You can be interested in everything. And it's my humble opinion, university and education, there ought to be a department of everything.
A department of where you can get a general education, a liberal arts education, right? Not everyone now is a narrow specialist.
No, you can just be interested in everything and not be intent on getting the specialized course of study that will give you an advantage. It's like job training.
Yeah.
It's like
education has become job training now.
I think it has. It was more, you could just interested in, that's what it was in the house. We were just interested in everything. You could go to the cyclopedia, and everything. And I think that's what it was that I liked it, because you could be interested close onto everything, looking for patterns between the various specializations. I really think we need more of that. And that kind of thinking is what I think comes to be called systems or comprehensive consideration. And I think that's what drew me to it more than any of the specialized things. Man's role in changing the face of big issues that you're not getting in depth on. I know about a lot of things an inch deep. And I want that. I want to be able to see patterns rather than be able to argue the exact tilde of the dating point of the one thing and everything. And everybody seems to be getting, I think it's a divide and conquer the intellectual enterprise that this specialization is. So that's one of the beefs I have against the way the world's set up. And then that model, that military model, is set up for virtually all of our institutions, it seems to me. And I think that was something that you're never sure just how it all came, but that's how I got into that, and got interested. And then I got in touch with Carl Sawyer.
Who was Carl Sawyer?
He was probably the greatest geographer. Yet Humboldt in Germany was a great geographer.
Humboldt was a great social scientist, right? Wasn't he?
Well, I think of him as a geographer and everything. And it was in the 19th century. It was the queen of the disciplines. But now they don't even have it at Harvard. They don't even have it at the major schools, because what's the point? It's so all-inclusive that there's no point in having it, so they just do away with it, which leaves room for people. I think it's a great place for systems thinking, but it's not given much, astrophysics and quantum mechanics and calculus and all that. And that's what's being stressed now. I guess it should be and everything. But comprehensive thinking, and then it finally gets around to where I picked up pretty early on Mr. Buckminster Fuller.
He's one of your heroes now.
Absolutely.
Educate our public who might not know, a new generation who is not familiar with this great thinker, this visionary thinker, Buckminster Fuller. Give us a quick, a generalist account on who was this man and why his ideas are still important.
Well, he was a comprehensivist. He was born in 1895. And he was, in my way of thinking, I don't know, there's a lot who you would see, Joyce or some of the great minds and everything, but and it's probably clouded by the fact that, some people have somebody they latch on to as being great and everything. I think he was maybe the greatest mind in the history of the universe, at least in a timely way toward the time in which we find ourselves. And he was a comprehensivist. He was totally unsuccessful. He was a design scientist. He didn't get involved in politics. He didn't say, don't get involved with the political context of everyday news and that sort of thing. He was a design scientist. Then he had a concept, anticipatory design science, where you, instead of doing something political to try and exercise or coerce. There's a lot of that going on in human history. Humanity to be good or adhering to a certain ideology or political philosophy or something. Develop artifacts, he would call them, or design functions that would make it possible for the good to emerge. So he had a reading of technology as an extension of consciousness, and I think that's an important lesson. He was very, very influential as I came into my years, like when you get to be 35, 40, and you hit your prime, and in a certain sense there. He was very influential and very, very widely, very, very much recognized by the intellectual community. And he's a major inspiration, I think, to this very day in terms of understanding things in a very comprehensive rate. He brought up the term synergy. And he would give a talk to people as an intellectual, a couple thousand people or something in an auditorium when he got to be recognized. And he would ask, has anybody heard the word synergy? And no hands would go up. Everybody had heard of energy. But synergy is the behavior of systems unpredicted by the sum of the parts. There's something resonatingly more than a maximally engaged system of interrelated parts of a subsystem. And that resonancy, for one thing, it makes it very difficult to argue in any absolutist way about the structure of the universe or any absolutist thing that people try to get their identity connected to. In terms of a very important thing for human society and consciousness is to have a sense of identity. And uncertainty, Heisenberg, or uncertainty. But he was the major philosopher, and he wrote magnificent. He wrote 2 books, Synergetics, that were very, very important. And he was a major inspiration, not only to me, but to a whole lot of people, particularly those that made up what was generally called the Woodstock generation, or that period of time that he focused on, that all the world was focused on, that we generally call, along about 1970. There was something major blowing in the wind, Bobby Dylan and that whole thing at that particular time. So he would have been the darling of many of the intellectuals of that time. And so he, major figure. I only did one program with him. I did one with him way back in 1974 when he was at University of Pennsylvania. He had done much of his work at Southern Illinois University.
Did you go to Pennsylvania to film this, or was it in New York?
Philly, yeah. He had and he had been at the Southern Illinois University, and I taught a year at Southern Illinois University. But he had developed a thing called World Game, and that's where you're thinking systems. You're thinking about the big issues of what's it all about, Alfie, or how is the world organized. We have, all of the physics coming down, quantum mechanics, and the understanding the universe, the seeing sort of things like Michio Kaku writes of, and that sort of thing, and coming to understand it in a very comprehensive way, and placing it all together in a way that also related back to the human condition at a very comprehensive level, not specialized.
Wow, that is quite a...
So he's inspirational. I think there should be more systems thinking on the part, because we're very good at pattern recognizing. We can see patterns between subsets of a system. And one last thing on that regard, like a human organism, as I understand, and again, everything I say has to be taken with a huge grain of salt, because I don't have the details. I'm not a detailed person. I'd be terrible at writing code. Did you ever try to write code?
No.
You have to have everything exact. Everything has to be exact, and I'm terrible at that sort of thing. I'm good at seeing patterns, okay? Yes. But in a human organism, as I understand it, there's something on the order, in a given organism, a human organism, there's something on the order of 100 trillion cells. Most of them are in the gut, but 100 trillion cells, and every cell matters. Every cell has an identity. Every cell is totally in communication with all the other cells making up the genome, okay? And they're all linked together as a system. So do you understand what I'm saying? It's getting the pattern, and then you can relate that. You could relate an individual to other individuals, or you can relate it to social organization. And we're probably heading toward a period of qualitative transformation in the evolution of let's say in organic evolution. We're coming to the end of the Homo sapien experience.
I want to try to get a little bit into also social justice and see how maybe Buckminster Fuller, because you talked about how like the synergy and people didn't know what that is. Well, I teach as a college English professor, and sometimes I'll say to my students, does anyone know who Dr. Cornel West is? A brilliant mind, and very few people even know who he is, but he's more political. But I'm just saying the lack of, he wasn't political, but we're a show on education, the arts, and social change.
Right.
We want to get into the social change elements as well, but everything you said is very interesting, and there's a feast of ideas that you normally don't see on television, and there's so much to cover, and you know, it almost feels like we need several hours to go deeper into your thoughts here.
Speaking in terms of pattern, then I wonder, you have good light here, because right, Claudia? So there's a chart. The major thing of the Fuller is a giant, okay? James Joyce, and there was Marshall McLuhan about media. These are all people who are looking at the intellectual community. And Fuller would be remembered by me and by others as perhaps the most important contribution of his many contributions to understanding not only that, but artifacts and technology. The geodesic dome, the most the most efficient way to enclose space, all over the world now, and everything like. But anyway, he did a thing at Southern Illinois, and he called it World Game, and that I think is what humanity is on the verge of coming upon in this particular time. But they took all of the resources, they took all of the human development, they took all of the institutions, and they had a decade, from 1965 to 75, a decade of reading the human condition in a very comprehensive way. He was saying what we're looking for is an operating manual for the term he coined, Spaceship Earth. We're looking for a comprehensive operating manual that we don't have. We're building upon reified institutions out of history and the context in which our whole society is organizing and is coming into a new order. And while we've got the good light, let me can you come in, Claudia? So if you
Spaceship Earth, according to Buckminster Fuller, okay, through Harold Channer, who was one of the great acolytes of Fuller. Would you call yourself a Fullerian? Is there a word for?
I just have unlimited respect for him. There's somebody else I like in terms of politics. He wasn't political. I mean, he was a genius. He was an artist, like an artist. Anyway, can you come in on the chart? This is a chart that he did. And this would bring up a concept. If we're thinking about the human condition now, one of the questions you could ask is, we got Homo sapien, 200,000 years we've been here, 10,000 generations, okay? And one of the unique things about our evolutionary being is not only are we in nature, and as we came out of the cave, and we're all African, right? And we came out of the cave. All the resources were here. All the air, all the water, all the land, all the oil, everything was here. And we had a liaison with the environment into which we were born as a species, with the ability to extend our consciousness into the environment and make the environment other than, in an Eden-like sense, is the way most creatures encountered the environment. Okay? And he took part of that. And then he came down and he's thinking about the human condition, and he said, if you're thinking, and you begin to just look out of the corner of your eye at the politics and everything, and you say, one thing that would be worthwhile considering is, in the material world, you get into the spirit, that's a whole other thing, ruled out by him, by the fact that it is a synergistic universe, and whether there is a God that created it all is still up for grabs. We don't know that, or how it came to be. But anyway, he said, one of the questions confronting mankind is concerning the human condition. What are we, 7 billion? We're heading for 10, right? The UN says. But what does it mean? And that by this technological extension, get back to my dad. My dad died when he was only 48.
Oh, that's
He
young.
died from that was young. No, but you know that was the average. He was born in 1899,
Yeah, that's right.
and he was born into a world. He had a heart attack, and the average age for a man born in 1899 was 48. There was no streptokinase. Streptokinase would be known to anybody, where it's a thing you got to clot, you put it in like Drano or yeah, didn't have it. So there's progress. You got penicillin. There's progress, and there's progress in terms of what would be called, and then he just differentiates. They differentiate. What does it mean for a human being, and particularly given the capability, not the limitations of the inherited institutions coming out of one condition we may be transcending. What does it mean for a human being to be a have? The have.
The have versus the have-not?
The haves versus the have-not. Okay. What does that mean? How do you define it? What do you get to? How many square feet of living space with so many washing machines do you need in order?
They say the 1% now versus the 99%. That's the new language.
That's political, yeah. Well, it's always been like that.
Yeah.
I mean, I think it's always been like that. Sure. But what does it mean to be a have with technological augmented capability of providing? We have buildings, we have washing machines, we have automobiles, and then what does it mean to be a have-not? And they got at, with this world game, 1965-75, they got to begin to define what that is. And then this chart that you had, I don't know if you're still on it or not, but are you? Yeah.
This reminds me of Ronald Reagan when he used to have the charts. Remember Reagan with the charts? But now this is more intellectual.
He's in a different class than Mr. Reagan. But anyway, this is a chart, and this is something interesting because he's looking back through time. And when you think about it, everything's going exponential now. It's coming to a time. And this would be a thing, and it's not zero coming out of time, coming out of history. So you see a flat line of the percentage of the world population that can realistically, in terms of augmented capability, be seen to be a have by standards that have to be set, okay? And they set those standards and did it. And they came up with this. They came out of history, and they said, by the First World War, the world population had reached a point where realistically, in terms of our capability, we had steam engines and things that were improving, and approximately 10% of the world's population could reasonably be seen to be a have. That's something that should be on the think tank's drawing boards or thinking people. And he said that was going toward hyperbolic. And it was going toward the Second World War. It got up to about 20% of the world. We were out of 10,000 generations. This is a defining generation. This is not your normal time. And he said we got to 20% of the world. This is in thinking, taking all resources into account, everything into account. Yeah. And he said, he wrote in 1952, this was done in 1952, he was with Luce and so forth in writing for Life anyway, but he said he made a projection. They made a projection into the future, and they saw the exponential coming. The exponential was coming.
And the inequality of wealth, you think?
No, the percentage of the world in terms of capability. We in 1900, no matter how much you thought, you could not fly from New York to Los Angeles because there was no airplane. You understand? There's growing, and the technology is what's growing. And so he said we had a 20-year period of imminent crisis to all human institutions from 1952 out into the future, and it was heading exponential. Okay, not beyond just hyperbolic. And he said that we would cross the 50% mark in terms of the evolving population, the capability of providing what is like a have status for them. We would cross the 50% mark.
So everybody
would probably be around 1972, and he held out, even on the chart that he wrote, it could be accelerated. He lived out his life thinking we crossed the 50% mark in terms of an evolving technological capability with ecological, with doing more. Oh, and he had a thing, doing more with less through good design. You can do more with less through good design. And he said we crossed that line in 1970. And that we now, since 1970, it is possible to hypothesize that we have, if you want to translate it into terms that have meaning to politics and all the rest of it, that we actually had, and it never is mentioned, can't be mentioned in terms of the politics there, But we had crossed a line where the reality, the evolving reality of human society in maybe anti-entropic function in the universe, perhaps, but we had transcended in terms of our capability the ironclad laws of scarcity. There were more haves than have-nots in our lifetime. Never in all of human history has that been the case. It should be on the desk of everybody thinking that, is that possibly termed? Is that possible? That we have crossed, that we have a capability of providing so that every single human being can realize their full potential within an ecological order that has never been available to us historically. Do you understand? Wow. That's the major thing here. And these are words that talk about that I wrote. So this chart's a major one that's informed me, and I think he was dead on the money. That's what was being felt in 1970 when we had the man on the moon, we had Woodstock, there was something blowing in the wind, there was something liberating in the air, and we've been wandering for about 40 years like Moses within the reified institutions coming out of history, all of which the assumption was there's not nearly enough. For one to win, somebody else has to lose. Zero sum.
That's a lie. That's a lie.
Well, not a lie. It was a reality. And I don't think, and you're saying you have a small group. There's always been a small group ever since civil war. About 10,000 years ago, they learned agriculture and they get civilization. And you always had the people living in a palace and everybody else wallowing around in the mud. Like serfs, like slaves. We lived as slaves for the most part for most of the people because that's all we could do. But now is a possibility we could have a liberated order within an ecological context for this time. So don't think about this as like the French Revolution or the Roosevelt years or a tax cut or all the issues that come up in the news. It's at a level of ontology or a level of a larger reality that is characteristic of the time in which we find ourselves. That's basic. Now, it affects all things economic and political, but that's never can be mentioned. It's ipso facto absurd. Everybody can see there's not nearly enough. People are starving. Do you understand?
Absolutely.
So the intellectual community is to not be sung a siren song of all the inappropriateness of all our institutions. Virtually all of our institutions are outdated, according to our liaison with the future. So he's a futurist, okay? And he was a major one. There were others, but that chart is a major one that ought to be in the briefcase of every thinking person on the planet rather than just ignored as ipso facto absurd. Let's get a tax cut for the rich or the poor or whatever. There are things we're arguing coming out of history because we're transcending 200,000 years of human history in this time.
Wow.
I just wanted to get that chart because it's never seen anywhere. It's never come up. It can't be mentioned. It seems to me.
This should be breaking news. Breaking news. This should be on Fox every day. No. Breaking news from Harold Channer. This chart needs to be known widespread.
Well, it's not Harold Channer.
Well, you're bringing it out there.
No, he was major, and there were others. There were majors, and intuitively you can see it. And we have a chance to liberate.
Yes.
In a way that it will create. Wouldn't it be wonderful if humanity was like a great big jam session? Woo! Everybody pitching in and they're realizing their full tilt boogie capability of their full realization of their capability in a way, maybe with no score, but they come and then there will.
They could join us on the deck. They could join us here on the deck, right?
No, they would. No. Everybody. We're coming to the end of 200,000 years of evolutionary development on this planet called humanity. We're coming into a new relationship at another level in universe, and if we got humanity, we can liberate the human society, liberate it to an order of realizing their full potential. We have the capability. We have a capability our institutions won't allow us to realize because we're caught up with reified ideas that represent virtually everything they call reality. So we're in that time, And then that, if you did, you would have like a jam session. You hit high C, jam session. There will be a resonancy of a liberated humanity that will inter-accommodate us to a universe transcendent to what we've been through 200,000 years, and that will be synergistically nested within the operation of universal mind, if there is a universal mind, synergistically to be realized. But it's time for being born to a new way of being in universe, and it's never mentioned. But he laid the groundwork, and I think a lot of people, then you get into all the politics and everything that has to do with economics. He was, so anyway, that's why we have good light, so I just wanted to...
Brilliant.
Well, I mean, that's Fuller, and then there's all kinds of things that go after him, that follow in his wake, but he was the greatest, Marshall McLuhan was we used to visit with him every spring. He was writing on media and the effects of media. And now we're coming into this digitized world, and everything's going, and everything is under stress. All of our institutions are under stress. The basis of realpolitik, the major way in which political legitimacy has been established, is through whoever's got the biggest club. And the first right of international law is the right to conquest. You can just go out and conquest somebody, hit them on the head, set up a political system with military. It's still in play.
We're watching the Roosevelt documentary this week with Teddy Roosevelt. Teddy Roosevelt had the big stick, he went into the Philippines, he went into Cuba and all that. But in terms of, your analysis is so sharp and very, very right on point. And you remind me of Herbert Marcuse. Yeah. Herbert Marcuse, was from the Frankfurt School, and he talked about in Eros and Civilization, he said that we have enough stuff. People could have like a 5-hour work day or a 3-hour work day. There's enough pleasure to go around. There's enough material stuff and wealth that it's being hoarded. But how do we translate this, Harold, into some kind of politics that will be transformational in terms of realpolitik? I know these are intellectual ideas, but how do you get this? How do you get the man or woman in the street to understand this? People who may not have, be able to follow the complexity of it. We have a dumbing down education system now. How do we transform this into a politics that people can understand? Tomorrow is the big climate march, the big People's Climate March. Yeah. Talk a little bit about that, do you shy away from politics, or do you, in terms of intellect?
I've done a lot with politics and everything. And
talk about your political work.
Well, I haven't done much activism. I'm not particularly interested in doing anything.
Because thinking is also a form of doing, isn't it?
Yeah, but no, I think more than anything else, we need an intellectual understanding of what's going on. And it's coming to us in Niagara portions. Every day comes over the transom a new breakthrough in every field. Everything. It's like a quickening in a pregnancy. So what we have to do, what we want to get is spaceship Earth, including humanity. When you get a
spaceship Earth, here we go, baby.
Let's say you get a new computer system or something, you bring it out of the box, and they have what they call an operating manual. Okay. We need an operating manual for spaceship Earth that takes into account this transcending of material scarcity as real. It exists, and it doesn't exist in any of our institutions. We're all held back by institutions that have been reifying a situation. And the major one is political, and joined at the hip is economic. So you need some sort of a new economic order to liberate people, because people have been treated like slaves throughout all of human history. You got a king living eating on golden plates in the castle with big dogs, and they used to have big roasts of pig or something in the castles, and the masses are wallowing around in the mud, because that's all there was capable of. Now, and realpolitik was whoever had the weapons could conquer the other tribe, set up a system with soldiers to protect it, then have creation stories around their thinking, and then intellectuals who will sing the praises of it, and PR, ancient and modern, singing the praises of the one that is what's underlying the political legitimacy, so-called, is the club, or weapons is what makes for Now, that doesn't make a lot of sense in everything, but it does call for an if you have enough, If you're in a situation where there is enough, let's say you're in a situation where there's not nearly enough, everybody's fighting to get a bean or two to eat so they can survive. That's been the plight of humanity, and in a certain sense, that's it. Everybody, the most important thing in the world now that motivates human behavior and thought, I would submit, there may be something else. The most important single thing, there are things like love, generosity of the soul, generosity of the spirit, all of these kind of things. There's all these kind of things, and they do form. And you don't throw something out cavalierly because the system works. But the major thing that motivates human behavior and industry is money, economics. That's what motivates the educational system by and large now. The people go to get an education in something that will give them a certificate that will give them. Now, it's not only money, but it is also identity, and realize that's bigger, a sense of identity, but is so that they'll have a certificate where they can make money and have a job within the estate where the actual production is being done by capital instruments, all owned by a tiny plutocratic class.
Well, Harold, I'm trying to change that.
You got to change
but I'm trying to change it. I wrote a book called Money for Justice. I have an organization called the Ethical Business Society to transform the corporate culture to make it more kind, caring, and humane, and I talked about that on your show when I was a guest. I just want to say right now that you and I could talk for hours. This should be a 24-hour marathon. You have so much to say, Harold.
One thing
and you really need to
what
say,
we don't want to find are who are the enemies.
Right.
You shouldn't be. Nobody is an enemy. We're all caught up in it. And what we need is an understanding of what in the world and the universe is going on, because we don't have it. We're getting to it. People are beginning to understand. It's felt intuitively.
Yeah, we got to get you. We got
qualitative, not a quantitative change. It's a qualitative change that we are privileged or cursed to have been born into, this generation of people. This is not your normal period of history. It's a period of qualitative, punctuated equilibrium, new relationship to the universe that we've been born into. And it should be brought up once in a while.
Well, we got to get you on Charlie Rose. We got to get you out there. We got to get you on Charlie Rose. So that, wait a minute, Harold, please. You're on public access. You're the king of public access. But a lot more people need to hear what you're saying, I think. A lot more people need to get this message out there. So how do we get an audience that can reach the same amount of people that Fox News?
New guy over at MNN has joined this guy. What's his name? John Bredin. You know, I mean, he's bringing a class act in, and we got a lot of good people over there. And there's 3,000 of these across the.
Not for my wife Claudia, who's filming us now.
She does it all, pal. You would be lost without Claudia.
That's true.
Claudia is the brains of this whole. Not the brain, but she's the one who gets it all going. Absolutely. And we all need that.
Indeed.
But public access is very unique. It started about 1970.
Yeah.
70 is a major point. We've been wandering in the wilderness for 40 years like Moses. And it's time for us to begin to wake up to a new way of seeing things.
Well, Howard, we've got about 10 minutes left, and we'd like to go inside and your cozy home, because Claudia gave me the signal.
Oh, she gave you
the
signal?
Sure.
Oh, okay. Well, listen, I'll shut up. I could go.
We need to do several shows on this, because you have a lot to say. Harold, this is very important stuff.
Well, I don't know.
I want to talk about Joe Franklin. I want to segue from this to Joe Franklin. Talk about a segue. He was a guest on your show, Mr. Entertainment. So you go into the intellectual world, you go into the entertainment, the cultural world, nostalgia. You had Joe Franklin on. We're going to go inside your lovely home and talk a little bit about Joe Franklin now.
You want to do that?
Yes.
It's okay. It's beginning to get chilly anyway.
It's chilly. Okay, so we decided to come inside to finish the show, and before we continue, we have about 8 minutes left, and but I would like to read so our audience can get a sense of who has been a guest on your show over the years, Harold. Just a 3,000 altogether, but I want to give just a snapshot. These are just some of the people who, for me, I thought that they were very interesting. For me, other people might gravitate toward others, but if you go to your website, you can see Harold Channer. You've had on your show Rollo May,
Yeah.
the great psychologist who wrote Love and Will, a book that was very influential for me.
Together in Jerusalem. Yeah.
Oh my God! Okay, Pete Seeger, Hubert Humphrey,
Yeah.
Kevin Phillips, Ram Dass, Sanford Weill, Oliver Sacks,
Yeah.
Abby Hoffman,
Yeah.
Judith Molina,
Loved her.
George Romney, George Romney, the father of Mitt Romney, who also ran for president. Yeah, Buckminster Fuller, who you spoke about in depth on today's program. John Kenneth Galbraith, the great economist whose work impacted Franklin Roosevelt. We're watching the documentary this week. Ed Asner, the actor and activist. Stanley Aronowitz, the public intellectual. He's been on our show too. We love Stanley. Timothy Leary.
Yeah.
Jack Valente, head of the Motion Picture Association, Gary Hart, Ralph Nader. Now, when you have all these presidential candidates on your show, and I said to Claudia, well, I was also a presidential candidate, and I was also a guest on your show, so I'm in very good company there. I'm up there with Ralph Nader and Hubert Humphrey and Gary Hart and these kind of people. So, sitting inside now, we're just going to sort of bring this to a close, but also I want to, just in addition to all of these amazing guests, you recently had Joe Franklin, one of my heroes as well, talk show heroes. Talk a little bit about Joe Franklin.
Joe Franklin, I love dearly. I've only just come to know him well. I'd met him a few years ago in passing and everything, but he's a giant in terms of where we are. We're in television, and television's relatively new, and even newer than television is cable television, even newer than cable television is digital television, but we're in the television game, as it were. And he was very involved, and he originated. A&E did a 2-hour piece with him about television development, and they ascribed to him the title. He was the originator of the talk show format. So we are all in Mr. Franklin's wake. His pace-setting wake, in terms of, because so much of what we do, like what we're doing now, is a talk show. And they had a competition coming with the movie industry, Hollywood, because they'd have to have big budgets. Remember Burton and Taylor with $40 million budget and everything all went to the star.
With Cleopatra.
Yeah, and you have to have elephants, and you have to have railroad trains. You have to have a big budget stuff. And the movie industry was very chary of television. They didn't pay much attention. They didn't think it was going to amount to anything. But it became very clear it's going to become a major thing in terms of American and world society. And so they started taking an interest, and they said, and they realized they're going to have a whole lot of screens. And it's true. We're going to end up with 7 billion television channels, it seems to me, with the smartphones. They can make television. But anyway, they realized that, and they said, what in the world, how are we going to do? We can't get Hollywood budgets for everything, and, all the elephants on the stage and everything. And so they said, and he invented the talk show. Because it was cheap. Yes. All you need is 2 chairs and decent lighting, and you've got a show, Well, and he's done it magnificently. He knew everybody in the world of entertainment and so forth, and others too. And he's a serious guy to intellectual things, but he's mostly Bing Crosby. Jimmy Durante, all the great...
Frank Sinatra 4 times.
Frank Sinatra.
Ronald Reagan.
All the stars. Yeah. And also, he's what in the Yiddish they call a mensch. That's a really good human being, right? And I've been visiting with him. He's got this office. It's become like a shrine.
It's very neat and clean office, right? Totally it's totally not a speck, nothing out of place, right?
That's the height of facetiousness on our part. No, it's a mess, but it's a beautiful mess, and it's gorgeous. He's got all these posters, and you've been there. No, you got to go. You got to go. And one of the things you notice he's been with all the stars on a first name basis, friendly. And everything, and then he's also he's in that building on 43rd Street around 8
Times Square Arts Center. I know it well. Yes, I read there. I read one of my essays there.
Studying Stella Adler, and you got all these young things coming in from Iowa who want to be a star. And everybody, and that's really good. And he treats them so welcomingly and encouraging. I mean, people who want to be stars, not just the stars, but he is so gentle and beautiful with them all. But like Jimmy Durante, he always, everybody will say, well, can you come to Aunt Sarah's wedding anniversary party we're having out in Queens? He say, yeah, but you can't accept everything. So very often he will be, he's a beautiful guy.
Well, I want to say something. Claudia and I love watching your interview with him, and you did something that was very reverent and very special, and you kissed his ring.
I did.
And I think
the emperor of television. Yeah, he set the pace for virtually all. Certainly public access. 90% of what we do is the talk show.
But Harold, I see you as my mentor at M&N, and I am going to kiss your ring because you are.
I have no ring. I have no ring.
But that's how I feel about you in terms of my interest in human.
I'm glad to have you
I have an interest in human conversation and dialogue, and you're educating me and watching you and learning from you. You had me on your show 3 times. I want to thank you.
Finally, after all these years of wandering, and we finally got a class act like John Bredin on the faculty at University of MN. I think we're going to become a major source of inspiration. And don't forget, there's 3,000 of them across the country, and they're streaming to the world. That's where a lot of people who are not thinking about the economics of getting a job, they're being undercut by robotization and everything. That's going to become a major place for intellectual and entertainment of the highest order within public access. It's been thought of as just narcissistic egos, but it's a major place for getting together toward, well, in my way of thinking, a real honest-to-God operating manual for spaceship Earth that can help us make sure we don't annihilate the species, which the weapons now have the capability of, but that we liberate them and the ecology, which is the offering of the moment. We're being signaled.
That's wonderful. Well, the tyranny of time. That's right. Claudia's going to boot us off the air. Right. Well, thank you, Harold. I can only say this is in hope that this is the beginning of several appearances on our show. You're always welcome back. Thank you for enriching our audience tonight and us with these wonderful ideas. And stay strong, my friend. And you are, again, one of my great heroes on public access and one of the great intellectual minds in New York and in the world. Thank you, Harold Channer.
Mutual Admiration Society. George, thanks for you, and particularly Claudia.
Yes. Yes.
Thanks, Claudia.